But let's discuss the attack. As you said, it was a surprise to Iran. You said also it was unprovoked. Obviously, there's ways to debate this. Was it unprovoked, considering what the IAEA has announced in not being able to verify that Iran is not building nuclear weapons? But at the same time, there were negotiations that were planned for Sunday, and really no one expected this. When people asked me, even though there were the evacuations at the US embassies, even I didn't expect not only an Israeli attack, but the size of the attack. So my first point, or my first question is, what was your initial reaction, and what do we know, at least from the ground in Iran, what do we know so far, and how successful was that attack for Israel? Or how destructive was it for Iran?
Yes, for a couple of things. One is that the Iranian armed forces knew that the Israeli regime would attack, and they were on alert. What wasn't expected was that the Israeli regime would attack senior officials, and that they would attack senior military officers, because that would be another higher phase. It would be open warfare. The Iranians thought that they would probably attack military bases and perhaps the nuclear program, but that they wouldn't go further than that, because that would be madness. But of course, they miscalculated, and the Israeli regime, which carries out genocide, is quite mad. But I have to correct one thing that you said, and that is that the IAEA has never, in the past nor in the present, have they produced evidence that Iran has been pursuing a nuclear weapon. In fact, the Americans have admitted as much since 2003. The fact, though, is that Iran was never pursuing a nuclear weapon. And the IAEA Board of Governors is a very political body, and it's dominated by the West, like all other international institutions. And if people go and look at the board, the West is disproportionately powerful on the board. And they can always have a few smaller, weaker countries to join them and get their way. But if you look at the numbers, the population of countries, if you include that, the vast majority of the global South voted against the Western position. India did not vote for it. China voted against it. Russia too. So, and other countries as well. So there's a lot of evidence. If your viewers look at the WikiLeaks documents, they will see that the previous head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, when he wanted to become, he was Japanese, when he wanted to become the head, he told the Americans that, look, you choose me and I'll be with you on all major issues. And that is the same today. So there's no evidence that Iran ever pursued nuclear weapons. And Netanyahu, the serial liar and genocidal monster, he has been saying Iran is on the verge of producing nuclear weapons for almost 4 decades now. I thought it was 3 decades, but Larry Johnson, a good friend, told me no, it's more than that. So Western media won't, of course, point this out. They'll simply repeat the new accusations, and they'll do what they've done in Gaza. They'll do what they did in Lebanon. I was in Lebanon during the initial week of war, and when they started bombing Beirut, and Western journalists based in Beirut who had fixers that were Lebanese, who had drivers who were Lebanese, who had producers who were Lebanese, they were saying they're bombing Hezbollah strongholds, they're bombing Hezbollah sites, whereas they knew that the Israelis were bombing civilian targets because some of their people were working there. So this is how the West functions. It justifies what the Israelis do, but this was completely unprovoked. And now that has enraged Iranians, because innocent people were killed, and they've gone to the streets and they've demanded that the government respond, that the military respond.
So, Mr. Marandi, just a couple of questions. I want to go back to the attack. You said the attack was a surprise. There's also been reports, and would love to get your comments on it, what information you have, that commanders were on the ground in Iran planning these attacks. There have been reports that there were an explosive drone base, at least one, in Iran that was used for this operation. We've also got reports that vehicles that were carrying weapon systems were smuggled into Iran that allowed them to take out air defenses. Was that part of why the attack was so successful for Israel?
Actually, the attack wasn't nearly as successful as they claimed. Many of the targets that they hit were I don't remember, I don't know what the English word for it is, but um, they were not real. They are like
Decoys.
yes, they were decoys. So, and if you look, I posted some of these online. You see that there's no secondary explosion, even though the Israeli regime published them. So a lot of these were decoys. And as I said, the Iranian military was on alert. But yes, the Israeli regime did use drones. They have people in Iran who they've hired who work for them. They never had a base or anything like that. That's for Hollywood. But they have people who they hire and use these tiny drones to carry out attacks. And it actually shows that the intelligence agencies that were and the people who were involved in the attack on the Russian strategic bombers were the same people who were who designed these attacks in Iran, because they were using the exact same method. The planning and the way in which it was carried out was almost identical.
So what surprised me, and I said the same thing, I was speaking to the spokesman for the IDF just before this, and what surprised me with the attack, Mr. Marandi, is Iran's retaliation, Iran's attack. So I was doing an interview with a former US intelligence officer. I can't remember the name again. I should have probably checked. But we saw the attack live. And what he told me in the interview is he expected many waves. I think it was a third wave. And many missiles did strike Israeli territory. But we didn't see more waves after that. He said, Israel needs to strike decisively. And there needs to be about a couple of thousand missiles at least. And I think we saw about 200 of them, if my numbers are correct. Is that strategic by Iran, or has Israel successfully managed to strike the missile launchers? Because Israel was also striking Iran while Iran was launching those missiles. And I'm trying to completely discuss the military aspect of it. One side is successful or the other in different ways, without getting political on who's right, who's wrong. We could discuss that afterwards.
No, the Israelis have not been able to touch any of Iran's underground missile bases or drone bases. They've been designed and created over the years so that missiles and airstrikes would not be able to destroy them. They were designed for potential American attack, where you would have heavy bombers flying overhead that would bomb them. And we saw in Yemen how the Americans failed. The Wall Street Journal admitted after the bombing campaign began that they were unable to destroy these underground bases in Yemen. Iran is a different world altogether. And that's why, after weeks of killing innocent people in Yemen, Trump had to capitulate and he backed down. In the case of Iran, they don't have the ability to touch Iran's missile bases or drone bases. And as I said, the Iranians have a lot of decoys out there, and they know how to fight.
But why was the response? Sorry to interrupt you, sir. But why was the response by Iran restrained? In your opinion, do you think that's intentional or strategic?
Oh, yes, definitely. Well, first of all, during the first few hours, the Iranians had to put in military commanders to take charge. And then the Iranians, when they began to strike back, I think, and I'm just speculating, I'm not privy to any secret information, but I think that they don't want to shock the world. What the Iranians have been doing from the very beginning in their conflict with the United States is that they've been trying to show the world, because we don't have media and we don't control the narrative like they have been able to do for the last few decades. So, for example, when Iran sits at the negotiating table, Iran knows that the United States is not being honest. We saw Witkoff in the first couple of weeks say one thing, and then he suddenly shifted position. Iran is not foolish. It knows that something is going on in Washington. Iran sees movement. Iran sees how the United States constantly flip-flops and changes its position. But Iran sits at the negotiating table so that the international community, the global South in particular, that they see that the problem is not Iran, it is the United States. In the case of Iran, Iran is not going to just suddenly fire, I don't know, 2,000 missiles. They're going to hit the Israeli regime wave after wave, and I'm pretty sure that in the coming hours we're going to see that again. This is probably going to be a confrontation that will last a while. And the Iranians want ordinary Israelis to get sick and tired of what Netanyahu has imposed upon them. And the belief in Tehran is that the regime, the Netanyahu regime, is really acting as in the interest of Netanyahu rather than in the interest of the broader Zionist population. And he's only destroying, he's destroyed the image of the regime, but the Iranians want to make sure that Israelis over the coming days and weeks understand that what Netanyahu has brought upon them.
So essentially what you're saying, Iran's strategy right now is not to use all the missiles they have at their disposal, or the launchers they have at their disposal, and be prepared for a prolonged war. But there's many that are comparing this to Hezbollah. Hezbollah was decapitated at such speed, and in this case, many would argue it was done even quicker, that people expected Hezbollah to be ready for a prolonged war, but that wasn't the case because the capabilities were destroyed relatively quickly. You're saying, obviously, Iran is not Hezbollah. Iran is significantly larger. It's much larger territory, been preparing for a very long time, much stronger military. But there is an argument, there's a narrative at least, that Iran's capacity to respond has been severely damaged. Based on your response, you're saying that is not the case, and Iran is strategically responding gradually each day, sending missiles, and you'd expect a new wave of missiles today, if that is the case, correct?
I think time will tell. First of all, Hezbollah was not defeated, and Hezbollah's capabilities exist now.